Is the 48-hour ultimatum from the United States to Iran the fulfillment of the prophecy of Jeremiah 49? At this very moment, as you hear these words, the deadline established by Donald Trump is coming to a close. 2,600 years ago, the prophet Jeremiah wrote that God would break the bow of Elam, destroy its kings, and scatter its people to the four winds. Elam is the territory we know today as Iran, and 23 days ago, the Iranian supreme leader was killed. The country's military force was devastated, and millions of Iranians fled to other nations. Historical coincidence or biblical prophecy being fulfilled before our eyes? Consider the scenario. March 21, 2026, a Saturday, 19 hours and 44 minutes Brasilia time. Donald Trump publishes a message on the social network Truth Social that makes the world hold its breath. In capital letters, the American president writes that if Iran does not fully and without threats open the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, the United States will attack and obliterate its power plants, starting with the largest. 48 hours. The deadline expires this Monday, March 23rd, at 20 hours and 44 minutes. As you follow this narrative, that clock is ticking. But to understand what is happening, we need to go back in time, not just a few weeks, but 2,600 years. The prophet Jeremiah lived in one of the most turbulent eras in the history of Israel. Jerusalem was about to fall into the hands of Babylon. The temple would be destroyed. The people would be taken captive. And amidst this chaos, God gave Jeremiah a series of prophecies regarding foreign nations. One of them was about Elam. Elam was located east of Babylon, in what today corresponds to southwestern Iran. It was an ancient, powerful civilization known for its archers feared throughout the Near East. The bow was the source of Elamite military power, and that was exactly what God said he would break. Consider the words of chapter 49 of Jeremiah, verses 35 to 39. God declares that he will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might. He will bring upon them the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and will scatter them toward all those winds. There shall be no nation whither the outcasts of Elam shall not come. God will cause them to be dismayed before their enemies. The sword shall pursue them until he has consumed them. And then, something extraordinary. God says he will set his throne in Elam and will destroy from thence the king and the princes. King and princes destroyed, military power broken, the people scattered to the four winds. Now observe what happened on February 28, 2026. A joint military operation between the United States and Israel struck Iran with unprecedented intensity. The operation was called Lion's Roar by the Israelis and Epic Fury by Washington. The attacks began in broad daylight, while millions of Iranians were going to work or study. Unlike previous operations that lasted a few hours, this one was planned to continue for days. The primary target was hit. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, supreme leader of Iran for nearly 37 years, was killed in the bombings. The information was initially denied by the Iranian government, but confirmed hours later by state media. Khamenei was 85 years old and had commanded the country since 1989. Along with him, his daughter, his son-in-law, a grandson, and a daughter-in-law died. The complex where he was located in Tehran was severely damaged. But it was not just the supreme leader. The secretary of the National Defense Council was killed. The commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was eliminated. The Iranian Air Force was debilitated. The Navy was, in large part, destroyed. About 80% of the ballistic missile launchers were rendered useless. Scale this. In a matter of weeks, Iran lost its maximum leader, a large part of its military and political leadership, and the backbone of its strike capability. The bow of Elam, to use the language of Jeremiah, was broken. And what happened to the people? Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, more than 5 million Iranians have left the country. The Iranian diaspora has spread to the four corners of the world: United States, Canada, Germany, United Kingdom, Australia, Turkey. With recent conflicts, this exodus has intensified. Families flee combat zones. Young people seek refuge in neighboring countries. The prophecy speaks that there would be no nation where the fugitives of Elam would not go. But here arises the first question you need to ask. Are we witnessing the literal fulfillment of a prophecy written more than 2 millennia ago, or are we merely drawing convenient parallels between an ancient text and contemporary events? This is an honest question, and it deserves careful analysis. As you reflect on these words, something inside you recognizes. There is a deeper dimension behind the events we see in the news. It is not just missiles and ultimatums. It is not just death tolls and economic statistics. There is a plan that surpasses human understanding. And that is exactly what makes it so important to understand the Scriptures in depth. Many people know biblical history superficially, but few understand the spiritual significance that connects ancient events to the present day. If you feel this desire to deepen your faith and understand what God is doing at this moment in history, there is material that can transform your spiritual perspective. The digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, reveals the profound meaning of Christ's final words on the cross, the most decisive moment in human history when God's entire plan was fulfilled. To access this book right now, take your cell phone, open the camera app, and point it at the square code appearing on the screen. A secure link will appear automatically. Tap it, and you will have immediate access to the digital book. If you prefer, the link is also in the description of this video. On a cell phone, tap the video title or the More option to see the full description. On a computer or television, look just below the video. Thousands of people are already deepening their faith through this reading. And by accessing the book, you also help keep this channel active, allowing us to continue producing biblical content like this. Access now and leave your Amen in the comments. To answer the question we asked honestly, we need to look at 2 sides of the issue. First, what scholars say about the historical fulfillment of the prophecy. Second, what is happening now and how it compares to the biblical text. Many theologians affirm that the prophecy of Jeremiah 49 was already fulfilled in antiquity. When? In 596 before Christ, Babylon conquered Elam. Decades later, Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, took control of the region. The Elamites were incorporated into the Persian Empire. The independent power of Elam as a nation was in fact broken. But there is another perspective. Many scholars of eschatology interpret biblical prophecies with what they call double fulfillment, one realization in antiquity and another in the end times. It is with this understanding that Persian Christians, for decades, have observed the prophecy of Jeremiah with special attention. Now consider the specific language of the text. God says he will set his throne in Elam. This goes beyond a simple military conquest. It speaks of establishing his dominion, his authority, his government over that land. And here enters an element that few political observers consider, but which is impossible to ignore for those who study the Scriptures. The Christian church in Iran is growing explosively. In a country where conversion to Christianity is a crime punishable by imprisonment and even death, it is estimated that there are millions of secret Christians. There is no way to obtain precise numbers, precisely because believers must live their faith in secret. But reports from missionary organizations point to an unprecedented phenomenon. Downloads of Bibles in Persian have increased dramatically in recent years. Underground churches are multiplying. Iranians who fled the country take their faith wherever they go and report that many of their compatriots are finding Jesus. And here is a connection that spans the centuries. On the day of Pentecost, recorded in Acts chapter 2, the Bible specifically mentions that there were Parthians, Medes, and Elamites among those who heard the gospel in Jerusalem. All these peoples were from the region that today corresponds to Iran. The first Iranians to hear the message of Christ were there at the birth of the church. 2,000 years later, while missiles cross the skies and ultimatums are issued, the gospel is returning to the land from which those first listeners came. But let us return to current events because they continue to unfold in real time. After the death of Khamenei, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. This is one of the most important maritime routes in the world. About 20% of all oil exported globally passes through there. Imagine a water corridor only 54 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, and through it flows a quarter of the world's oil production. 150 tankers were anchored in the open sea, unable to pass. The price of a barrel of oil soared to over $109. Analysts project that if the blockade continues, it could reach $170. American Airlines cancelled more than 5% of flights to save fuel. Asian stock markets plummeted. The global economy entered a state of alert. And it was in this context that Trump issued his 48-hour ultimatum. But what happens when the deadline ends? There are three possible scenarios. First, Iran finds a diplomatic way out, claiming the strait was never formally closed, allows some ships to pass, and Trump declares victory while negotiations begin behind the scenes. Second, Trump postpones or softens the threat, as he has done with previous ultimatums, and the crisis drags on without a clear resolution. Third, the United States attacks Iranian power plants. Iran fulfills its promise to close Hormuz permanently and attacks the energy infrastructure of American allies in the region. And a war that is already the worst energy shock in 50 years becomes dramatically worse. On Monday, March 23rd, hours before the deadline expired, Trump announced that he ordered the suspension of attacks on Iran's energy infrastructure for 5 days. The Iranian government interpreted this as a retreat, but tension remains. Consider the human dimension of all this. Iranian hospitals were hit, water systems were damaged, schools were destroyed. The Revolutionary Guard released a statement listing 5 water infrastructure facilities attacked, including a desalination plant. Millions of ordinary people who have nothing to do with the decisions of their rulers are paying the price. And here enters another passage from Jeremiah that deserves reflection. In verse 37, God says he will cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies. The original Hebrew word carries the idea of terror, of paralyzing fear. Reports coming from Iran speak exactly of this. The country is in shock. The loss of the supreme leader, a figure who commanded everything for nearly 4 decades, left a power vacuum. No one knows for sure who is in command. A temporary leadership council was formed, but even American officials admit privately that they do not know with whom to negotiate. You cannot make a deal if you do not know who can sign it. As we follow these events that seem taken from an apocalyptic narrative, an urgency arises within us to understand what is truly behind all this. The Bible is not just a book of ancient stories. It is the revelation of God's plan for humanity, including the days in which we live. The digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, can help you understand the connection between the cross of Christ and the events of our time. Point your cell phone camera at the QR code on the screen or access the link in the video description. By doing so, you also support this channel to continue producing biblical content. Access now. Now let us go to another biblical connection that many are making. The book of Ezekiel, chapter 38, describes a great coalition of nations that will attack Israel in the last days. The prophecy of Gog and Magog. And the first nation mentioned in this alliance is precisely Persia, modern Iran. But here an important observation is necessary. Ezekiel's prophecy describes Persia as part of a coalition attacking Israel. What we are seeing now is the opposite, Israel and the United States attacking Iran. This does not invalidate Ezekiel's prophecy, but it shows that perhaps we are in a moment prior to its fulfillment. A moment of preparation, a moment in which the stage is being set. The question that arises is, could the weakening of Iran now lead to a future reorganization that would culminate in the coalition described in Ezekiel? It is impossible to know for sure, but scholars of biblical prophecy are watching closely. There is yet another prophecy frequently cited in this context. Isaiah 17, verse 1, speaks about Damascus, the capital of Syria, ceasing to be a city and becoming a ruinous heap. Damascus is considered one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. It has never been completely destroyed. If this prophecy were fulfilled literally, it would be an unprecedented event in history, and Syria is an ally of Iran. The developments in the Middle East are all interconnected. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq. All these groups received Iranian support. With Iran weakened, this entire network is shaken. But let us return to the text of Jeremiah, because there is a final element we cannot ignore. In verse 39, after all the words of judgment, God makes a surprising promise. But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord. Restoration. After all the destruction, after the dispersion, after the fall of kings and princes, God promises to change the fortune of Elam. The expression, in the latter days, is significant. It points to a future time, a time of final fulfillment. And what does it mean to change the fortune? In the biblical context, this expression is frequently associated with spiritual restoration, not just political or economic, but a return to God, a revival, a transformation. This is exactly what Persian Christians who fled Iran and now live in other countries report. They speak of an unprecedented move of God among their people. They speak of dreams and visions that lead Muslims to seek Jesus. They speak of churches that grow even under brutal persecution. They speak of martyrs who preferred to die rather than deny their faith. The prophecy of Jeremiah may be fulfilling in a way that no political analyst can perceive, not only in the military and geopolitical dimension, but in the spiritual dimension. The bow is being broken, the kings are falling, the people are being scattered. But in the midst of all this, the throne of God is being established in Iranian hearts. Faced with this spiritual reality unfolding before our eyes, do you feel the need to strengthen your own faith, to understand God's plan more deeply? The digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, is the next step for this journey. Point your cell phone at the QR code or access the description of this video. By accessing, you support the continuity of this channel. Now we need to pause to be fair to the complexity of the theme. There are serious scholars who argue that connecting Jeremiah 49 to current events is forcing an interpretation. They point out that the prophecy was already fulfilled in antiquity, when Elam was conquered by Babylon and later absorbed by the Persian Empire. They argue that using biblical texts to explain contemporary geopolitics can lead to hasty and potentially dangerous conclusions. This perspective deserves respect. The Bible is not a direct map of current events. It needs to be interpreted with care, humility, and respect for the original historical context. On the other hand, there are patterns that are difficult to ignore. The precision with which certain elements of the prophecy seem to align with current events. The death of the supreme leader, the destruction of military capacity, the dispersion of the people, the dismay before enemies. The truth is that we have no way of knowing with absolute certainty whether we are witnessing a prophetic fulfillment or not. But we can observe, we can study, we can pray for discernment, and we can remember that, whatever the correct interpretation, God remains sovereign over history. Consider also the dimension that few are discussing. The book of Daniel, chapter 10, verse 13, mentions the prince of the kingdom of Persia resisting an angel sent by God for 21 days. Scholars interpret this as a reference to spiritual principalities, demonic forces that exert influence over nations. There is a spiritual war behind the physical war, and perhaps that is what explains why, in the midst of so much destruction, the Christian faith is flourishing in Iran. The spiritual forces that kept those people in slavery for centuries are being confronted. The gospel is advancing where it seemed impossible. Scale what this means in practice. A young Iranian who grew up hearing that Christians are enemies, that the Bible was corrupted, that Jesus was only a minor prophet. This young man, in the midst of the chaos of bombings and uncertainties, has a dream of someone dressed in white who says, "I am the way." He wakes up disturbed. He looks for information on the internet. He finds a site with the Bible in Persian. He begins to read, and his life is never the same again. This is happening thousands of times. It is not theory. These are real testimonies of Iranian converts. The faith that is transforming Iranians in the midst of conflict is the same faith that can transform your life now. No matter what your situation is, the words of Jesus on the cross have power to bring hope, healing, and direction. Discover the profound meaning of these words in the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem. QR code on screen or link in description. Access and leave your amen. Returning to real-time events, the situation remains extremely volatile. Iran launched for the first time in this conflict a long-range missile with the capacity to reach 4,000 kilometers. This places dozens of European countries within the strike radius: London, Paris, Rome, Madrid, Berlin. Only Portugal, Ireland, and Iceland would be out of reach. The message is clear. If the conflict escalates, the consequences will not be restricted to the Middle East. Iranian missiles also hit the vicinity of the Dimona nuclear center in Israel. For the first time, Iranian retaliation demonstrated operational capacity to reach the atomic heart of American allies. And there is the ghost of something even more grave. The Bushehr nuclear power plant in Iran is one of the possible targets. If hit, it could release radioactive clouds over the Persian Gulf, contaminating international waters and making commercial navigation impossible for years. The world is literally playing with nuclear fire to resolve a maritime traffic dispute. But there are also diplomatic movements behind the scenes. Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, Trump's son-in-law and advisor, are involved in initial discussions about a possible deal. Egypt and Qatar are transmitting messages between Washington and Tehran. Iran signaled interest in talks, but in harsh terms. Ceasefire, guarantees that the war will not be resumed, and compensation. The United States wants the opposite. Zero uranium enrichment, end of funding to armed groups, permanent restrictions on missiles, and the Strait of Hormuz open. So far, there has been no direct contact between the two governments. The question hanging in the air is, how does this end? No one knows. And perhaps that is exactly the point. In moments like this, when all human wisdom seems insufficient, when political calculations do not account for the complexity, when the future is completely uncertain, is when we are reminded that there is someone who knows the end from the beginning. Jeremiah wrote his prophecy 2,600 years ago. He had no way to imagine ballistic missiles, nuclear plants, or social networks, but the God who spoke through him knew every detail of what would happen. And that same God knows what will happen tomorrow, next week, next year. The prophecy of Jeremiah 49 does not end with destruction. It ends with restoration. But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord. Whatever the exact fulfillment of this promise, it points to something greater than wars and ultimatums. It points to a God who does not abandon the nations, who has plans of redemption even for those who seem most distant, who is capable of bringing life where only death exists. The Magi who came from the east to worship Jesus in Bethlehem were likely from Persia. The Elamites were in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. Cyrus, the Persian king, was called by God my anointed and used to free the Jews from captivity. The history of Iran with the God of Israel is longer and more complex than most people imagine. And this story is not over. The prophecy of Jeremiah 49 does not end with destruction. In verse 39, God makes an extraordinary promise. But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord. While missiles cross the skies of the Middle East and ultimatums are issued from Washington, something silent is happening inside Iran. The Iranian Christian church, persecuted for decades, has grown explosively. Conservative estimates speak of millions of secret Christians within the country. Iranians scattered around the world are discovering the faith their ancestors had 2,000 years ago, when Elamites were present on the day of Pentecost and heard the gospel in the first hours of the church. The bow of Elam may be being broken, the kings may be being removed, the people may be being scattered to the four corners of the earth. But if the first part of the prophecy is being fulfilled, the final part will also be fulfilled. God promised restoration for this people, not a political restoration, but a spiritual one, not through missiles and ultimatums, but through the gospel that reaches hearts. And perhaps that is exactly what we are witnessing. Not just a geopolitical crisis, but the movement of God's hand over a nation he never forgot. The same nation that once sent Cyrus to free the people of Israel. The same nation whose Magi traveled to worship the child Jesus in Bethlehem. The same nation that now, in the midst of the storm, is discovering that the God of Jeremiah still speaks, still acts, and still fulfills every word he pronounced. If this narrative touched your heart and awakened in you the desire to deepen your understanding of the Scriptures and faith, this is the moment to take the next step. The digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, will take you to the heart of the gospel, to the final words of Christ on the cross where God's entire plan was fulfilled. To access now, take your cell phone, Open the camera app and point it at the square code on the screen. A secure link will appear automatically. Tap it and you will have immediate access to the book. If you are on your cell phone watching the video, tap the title or the More option to open the description, where the link is also available. On a computer or television, the link is just below the video. By accessing this material, you not only strengthen your own faith but also help keep this channel active, allowing us to continue producing content like this that connects biblical prophecies to the events of our time. Thousands of people have already accessed it and are transforming their relationship with the Scriptures. Access the digital book now and leave your amen in the comments. May the God who fulfills his promises abundantly bless your life. Amen.